I need to know, what do you think the Boston Celtics should do with those picks in this year's draft?
Well, again, Ante, this is a Rubik's Cube here for Brad, and primarily because of the injury to Jason Tatum.
Right.
Okay. Because you guys have probably discussed second April. First of all, let's put it on the table. New ownership.
Yeah.
So how is Mr. Chisholm going to react to whether they want to keep things going, knowing that you're going to be without JT for the year, or do you rebuild? Do you tear down a little bit? How much do you tear down? Who do you trade to move up in the draft? I trust Brad Stevens. He has made, since he left coaching and the sidelines to the front office, he's done a lot of positive things, obviously.
Yeah.
So to answer your question, we have to decide as the Celtics now, what do we do with, Porzingis, who looks like, I think his deal's expiring, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes. 1 year deal left.
You got assets. I don't think they can trade JB. I just don't see they can see that unless they get a mother load back for him. The only way that you trade Jaylen Brown right now is if you're nervous about the second apron, and then you can get, a plethora of great assets.
Yeah.
Then maybe you think about it. You got Derek White, who still has a lot of cachet around the league. Drew's contract is onerous. Let's face it, he's going to be 36 by the time JT comes back.
Right.
So there's a lot of moving parts here, and that's going to be the big decisions you make before you, hopefully before next week or after. I don't think you can move up a lot with 28 and 32.
Yep.
It's not like you're moving up to 6 because those picks are not valuable.
Right.
Unless you love somebody at 19 or 20 or 21.
Yeah.
And then you make the move on draft night, and then we can talk. But
yeah,
a lot of things going on with that roster.
Yeah. I mean, you brought it exactly to where I needed you to take it. I'm looking in the 19-20 range because I've been shouting the praises of Danny Wolf out of Michigan. I think that kid could be special here in Boston. I know I'm throwing you on the spot just a little bit, but what do you know about Danny Wolf? Do you think he could be a good fit here in Boston?
Of course. I was thinking about this and going through my mind, and this is a little bit maybe higher than 19. Let's say if they moved up to 19, for example. But, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, 11th? Ty Halliburton, 11th. Kawhi Leonard, 15th.
Yep.
There's guys that are going to be in that range that are going to end up being really good players. Now, we know that one thing we know about the Celtics going into next year, no matter what Brad does, is they need young help up front. Because of Porzingis' injury history, contract situation. Al's already heading towards AARP, as valuable as he is. But they got to get younger, no matter who they keep next year. And a guy like Danny Wolf is good. I like him. I'll tell you what he reminds me of. And I know he was a popular guy in Boston a few years ago, and that's Kelly Olynyk.
Yeah.
And you go, well, wait a minute, we don't want Kelly Olynyk. Well, Kelly's been in the league for a decade now.
Right.
And a young Kelly Olynyk is a pretty good commodity.
Yeah.
And that's Danny Wolf. He's a young Kelly Olynyk. Now, if you want to go the other direction, maybe a guy that's a little better defensively who's got great size. Now you're looking at Thomas Sorber from Georgetown.
Yeah, I like him too.
Who is a well-built, physical kid, mobility, agility, very a different kind of player than Danny Wolf, but the kind of guy that you might be able to get at 19 and all of a sudden a couple of years from now, like a Robert Williams was at the end of the first round. I know you were talking about Robert earlier.
Yeah.
And those are two guys that I think would be in the wheelhouse if they were to move up to, say, the late teens, early 20s. And that's capable of doing with 28 and 32 if you want to trade both to move up into the late teens.
Okay.
Interesting. Well, kind of combining what you and Ante are talking about here, say that they do want to kind of make some noise when it comes to the draft. What would you say if you threw on the GM hat and you were willing to depart? Who are you willing to move on from in order to package something to get a higher pick from any of these teams that you can negotiate with? What would make sense for the Celtics?
Well, I think when you talk about what makes sense is it gets back to who are the assets. The assets are Jaylen Brown, right? Not necessarily untouchable, right?
Mm-hmm.
Derek White's a big time asset, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Those two guys, let's start with them. Drew Holiday, still, although, you know, another team's got to keep in mind that Drew's going to be 35
Yep.
and play the season at 35. But he's still a tremendous asset for a playoff team. But you got to take on that contract. So to answer that question about who would you move on from, what are we getting back?
Mm-hmm.
If you tell me that Boston, you know, it'd be ironic if Brooklyn got involved with the trade, right?
Yeah.
With all, you know, to say take a Jaylen Brown. You know, Brooklyn has got a mother load of picks.
Yeah.
If Brad wants to retool, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, maybe a Cam Johnson gets thrown in there.
Right.
Yeah, so, again, not knowing how the contract situation works, who we're willing to depart with has a lot to do with who can we acquire to go younger, get the contract situation and the salary cap situation under control, and who can we bring back, you know?
NBA draft sleepers as a whole that you think, you know, guys that aren't, you know, being talked about by your casual fan that might be making some noise here come next season.
Well, that's a good one because, you know, if they do have to pick 28 and 32, you're getting a sleeper.
Yeah.
You know, I'll tell you, you're not getting a guy. I mean, listen, if you're taking 28, that means 27 teams passed on a guy, right?
Yeah.
Now, we know just a couple years ago, some kid from Villanova went, 33rd? Brunson, I think his name is, right? Brunson, and, you know, and then
Jalen, I think.
Who went 30th?
Jalen Brunson, right?
Jalen, yeah. Kid from Dad's from Springfield, you know, Springfield, Mass.
Yeah.
You know, this kid, Jimmy Butler, went 30th. I'm not sure whatever happened to him, but, you know, he was pretty good.
Right.
But I'll give you some names that I like. I've got some under the radar guys that I wrote down here.
Yeah.
Rasheer Fleming from St. Joe's, 6'8", power forward, can guard multiple positions, a terrific cutter, ball mover, and he shot like 38 or 39 from three this year.
Yeah.
If Sorber from Georgetown slips to 28, he's ideal. Drake Powell from North Carolina only averaged 7 points a game, but I love that kid. Defensive stopper, think he's a sleeper. You know, only a freshman. If you want a couple kids internationally, because I know you're going to ask me, guys, right?
You knew I was going to go to it. That was my next question. The international kids.
Yeah. This kid's moving up too fast now, but this is a guy that the Celtics could make a deal for at 19 or 20 in that range. Johan Beronji. How about that?
Got to say that
Johan
one slow.
Beronji.
Say it a couple of times. Okay.
Yes, I practiced that one in the mirror, and he's a 6'10" kid from France who I think has got great potential, kind of a Clint Capella type.
Okay.
And then another guy that here's a guy that I really like at 28 or 32, from Europe, Noah Penda.
Okay.
And this kid, when I watch him play, he reminds me of a kid from Methuen, Mass, by the name of George Niang. Keep that name in mind, Noah Penda.
Yep.
6'8", can play the four. Yep, write it down, and you'll say, "Damn, Fran told me about that kid." On a couple weeks ago. So keep that kid in mind. But there's going to be others. You know, there's some guys that I think are going to be there in the late 20s that Brad and his staff have identified. You know, they've got a great scouting staff. So I'm optimistic. I would say this: if you're a Celtic fan, trust in Brad Stevens because since he's gone to the management side, he's done some really good stuff for the Celts. And again, if you're a fan, you guys know next year could be a rough year. Okay, you know you don't lose a generational talent like JT, and we just hope that with an Achilles injury. I think you guys have probably talked about this ad nauseum. I can't see any way with an Achilles that he comes back next season. So, and if he does, it's a miracle, but I don't think they'll do that. And so you're really looking at a year that could be a transition year. But depending on what deals they make and what they put together and who they might move, who's got potential to bring assets, I think 26, 27 is still going to be a very bright year.